Hey, what's going on, Team Trek family? Welcome back. In the studio with us tonight, we got another awesome guest. She spent 25 years in the Air Force, some of it enlisted, some of it as an officer. She ended up retiring as a lieutenant colonel. She was a judge in the Air Force. Absolutely awesome story. Lynn Watkins, welcome to Team Trek Podcast.
Hey Ryan, thanks for having me.
Now it's awesome to have you, Lynn. We've been talking for the better part of a year about getting you out here. You've got a phenomenal story that I think is really going to impact a lot of the guests at home that are looking to try to find some sort of relief. Before we get into that, though, why don't we just get right into where you're from and kind of talk about yourself growing up? Let's get into your story a little bit, if you would.
Sure. So I grew up was born in Virginia Beach, Virginia, and to my mom and my dad. And then after, I think at the age of 2 or so, my mom and dad split up, and we moved to Elizabeth City, North Carolina, just about an hour away, hour south. And my mom met her second husband, who is my brother's father, so I have a half brother. And let's see, just kind of growing up in Elizabeth City, very small town. It's grown a lot, but would ride the bus to go see the grandparents up in Virginia on weekends, do the family thing, and at the Outer Banks. I was about 40 minutes from there, from where I grew up, so I'd take school trips to the Outer Banks. I don't know how many times I've seen the Wright Memorial with the airplanes and things, but and then my brother was born when I was 7, I think. No, we're 7 years apart, sorry. So he was born, so my mom and my stepdad were still together. Shortly after my brother was born, they divorced. That was a very ugly divorce. And then I went for a long period of time not being able to see my brother because my dad he took my brother, and then we weren't able to visit or see him. And I was living with my mom. We moved to, when I was 11 or so, we moved to Richmond, Virginia. And it was just she and I started actually working at the age of 11 for a grocery store. It's called Utotem grocery store. It's kind of like 7-Elevens. But I was stocking shelves for cash and then going to school there. Mom met another gentleman that she was the love of her life. And at one point she left to go with him to work out of town for a few months. And this is diving into some stuff pretty quickly, but she left me there in the neighborhood in our apartment at the age of, I think I was probably 13. I was still working at the Utotem, still going to school, but at this time I was now got some friends in the neighborhood. We're out till all hours of the night, running around, not getting in a single bit of trouble, but just loving. We lived near the Little Red River that ran through a part of our neighborhood. So we were on that water all the time playing, just out till all hours, but never once did we ever find any drugs or get involved with sex or any of that stuff. There's about 6 of us, I think, from the ages of like 9 to 14. But Mom was gone, and so I was kind of hopping around the neighborhood, staying with folks, and bills were coming due, and here I am at 13, and car gets repossessed, and I dealt with that. And I started staying with another couple who had a daughter who was, I think she was a year older than I, and they came to a point where it was over the summer that Mom had left, but she wasn't coming back before school started, so they wanted to adopt me so that they could, more than just a general power of attorney, but they wanted to adopt me. And of course the courts contacted my mom to see if she would, let that happen. She was not at all interested in letting that happen. And so she came back to town one day. And before that day, my mom and I had, I'd say, a pretty close relationship. My mom was never one for discipline. She was the one to say, wait for your dad to get home type thing. But that day she came back, she was quite angry, upset that these people were going to try and take her daughter. I'm still dealing with why she got so mad with me, but there was a lot of physical fighting that happened that day when I was 14. Saw a side of my mom I'd never seen before. And so the police were called, and they said, well, you need to go back with your mom. And I said I wasn't doing that after what she'd just done. And they said, well, you need to go into foster care. And I said, okay, I was fine with that. But my mother asked for a chance to make a phone call to some family. And she called an aunt and uncle who were back in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. And they took me in at 14. So they had a brand new baby, and they got a 14-year-old hard-headed teenager to move in with them, who was used to whatever hours I wanted to be up, do whatever I wanted to do. I was going to do it. So we had a few battles, but ultimately, I mean, I thank God for them taking me in, getting me through high school there in Elizabeth City at Northeastern High School. All through that time frame, was really great in school, honor society, A's, never missed school, really enjoyed school, but also became very independent. I mean, I guess I grew up really fast, working at 11 and then on my own pretty much at age 13. So after graduated high school, I moved in with another aunt back in Virginia Beach in the Portsmouth, the Tidewater area. And I went to Tidewater Community College, got my associates in business administration while I was working at Kmart full-time. So full-time work and full-time class load at one semester. I remember I was taking 19 hours and working full-time. So that was kind of tough, but I wanted to get the school done. After school, at that time, I guess because not really much, I don't know why it happened, but I started dating a guy who was twice my age. So I was 18, 19, he was 36, 37 years old. And family was not happy about that. But we ended up splitting. I had a real bad day at Kmart. So my boyfriend said that he was leaving town to go to a vocational school, and Kmart said that I was being released from my job there, and just a bad day. So I went and talked to an Air Force recruiter, and that was signed up within the week. I was signed up, but I was on a delayed enlistment program for 11 months. But I still said I wanted to go in. When my 11 months time came up, I left Portsmouth to go to Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, where I went through basic. Before starting off in my military career, so I was working, doing school full-time. My mom and I had tried to mend some fences, didn't really do too well. I was very close with my grandfather, who passed away not before I left for the Air Force, but soon after I joined the Air Force. My family's Navy, big Navy family. They're in the Norfolk area. And so when I joined the Air Force, I had two grandparents who were like, what are you doing? What are you thinking? And I said, I just don't want to go on a ship in the middle of the ocean somewhere. And so I went into the Air Force, and they both very proud down the road. They kind of got over me not doing the Air Force thing. But
what was your initial job coming into the Air Force? When you went to basic training, what was that for?
It was going to be for operations resource management. And I kind of say that's as an aircrew babysitter, because I was the one that made sure that they got their physicals, their altitude chambers, that they were qualified to fly. My first and only station as enlisted for about 8 years was at Little Rock Air Force Base. So I went to basic at Lackland, and then I went to Keesler Air Force Base in Mississippi for school. And while I was at Keesler, I got orders to Little Rock. And I was like, where's that? Where am I going? And at the time, they were going through a time where they were burning the American flag on the courthouse steps in downtown Little Rock. And I'm like, this is a fabulous place to be going as a military person, where they're burning the American flag. But I loved Little Rock. Little Rock Air Force Base is actually in the town of Jacksonville, Arkansas. But I was enlisted there for my whole time. I stayed there. I deployed out of there for a couple of the Desert Shield, Desert Storm, Gulf War, and then also one of my deployments was to MacDill Air Force Base for Operation Just Cause in Panama. Never saw the outside of the gate of MacDill. We were on base, and we had this. I was with C-130s. Little Rock has C-130s, and so took up all the squadrons of C-130s from Dyess Air Force Base in Texas. They all converged there at MacDill, and I was responsible in that job for handing out the KICs, K-I-K, which is what they plug into the planes to identify as friendly aircraft. So it's the secrets that go in the plane, and they change every day. Different codes go in a plane every day. And so something happened there that was, I got an award for it, but it was more of, I felt really proud of something that I had done. In handing out the KICs, I overheard one of the other bases, and they were handing out their materials to their aircrew, but they were on, I swore it sounded like they were on a different day. And so if they would have let their aircrew grow out, they would not have been able to identify that they were friendly aircraft. And so I was able to let my commander know, you might need to have a chat, sir, with their commander to see what's going on, because I really think there's something big about to be jeopardized here and putting lives at risk. And so sure enough, we got that corrected. And then all the C-130s took off to go to Panama, and they turned around mid-flight because the issues going on in Panama kind of leveled out a bit to where they didn't need the 130s to come in. And so they turned around, came back to MacDill, and picked us all up, and we went back to Little Rock, and that was a deployment.
Oh, wow.
So it was pretty tense at that time, but I think that was my first deployment, quote unquote, was for an operational readiness exercise, and I was brand new to the Air Force. And so I had my sea bag and everything with my helmet and my belt and stuff, and they're telling us, okay, you need to dress to this level, MOP 2, not MOP 4, but you need to have that stuff with you, your mask and everything. So I'm a 20-year-old kid and just going, I don't know what's happening. And we know that's an exercise, but we're taking off in the back of a 130, and we're flying to Savannah, Georgia, to a field there at, to be our deployed environment. And we did, my first flight on a C-130 landing was an engine running offload, where that C-130 comes down and hits the brakes really hard, ramp comes down, and everybody runs out the back. Well, I had left my helmet in the aircraft as I'm running out the ramp, and I was, dead almost immediately coming off the airplane. So that was my first experience in doing anything like that. But other times flying on C-130s turned out to be quite interesting as well. But so a few deployments, was at Khobar Towers 2 different occasions. I was supposed to deploy there at the time of the bombing, but I had severe sinus infection and couldn't fly, so I was not there for that. My squadron was there, from Little Rock was there, but and a number of the folks that unfortunately got hurt there, but that one I missed out on. Closing down Bravo Squadron at Mildenhall for C-130s. We took best deployment I went on was we went to Incirlik Air Base, Turkey, Mildenhall in England, and then we were back in Saudi Arabia. So we were doing 6 weeks at one, 6 weeks at another, 6 weeks at another, and that was a lot of good times, but very interesting cultures, 3 different cultures to travel to on that deployment. And then I deployed one other time for the Gulf, going into the Gulf. And all my deployment times were as enlisted. So when I left, when I was enlisted, I was I had my associates before I went in. I got my bachelor's in criminal justice while going to school at night, and then said I just don't. The job I have is data entry. I can tell you what we're doing at 7:30 in the morning, 10 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Even in a deployed environment, our main responsibility was handing out the secrets to the aircraft and then getting those back when the planes came back, along with whatever flying time they had. And we entered that in a computer. So I said, there's got to be something else that I can do. I applied to law school at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. It's the only law school I applied to. Got in and found that out while I was on terminal leave. I'd already decided I'm going to do something different. This has been great, but let's do something different. And I did. Went to law school in 2.5 years. It's usually 3 years. I got done in 2.5. I kind of wanted to get that school thing done again. Worked for a law firm there in Little Rock for about a year and a half or so, but I missed the military. I missed the structure. I missed the family, the camaraderie. Missed most of the Air Force. Not, of course, there's always something that you're like, I'm glad to leave that behind. But so after I passed the bar in Arkansas, and my boss was not interested in giving me any kind of increase in pay from being a law clerk to being an attorney. And so I called the JAG Corps up in the Air Force and said, "Do you need a lawyer?" And this was in December, and December of '99, April of 2000, I was back on active duty going to Maxwell Gunner for officer training school. And things that were happening personally, I'd left family behind in Virginia. Left the gentleman that I had been with, thought was the love of my life and everything, left him behind. And then when I got to Little Rock, when I was 21, met a gentleman, and we got married after knowing each other a month. Married almost 9 years. And he said after I graduated law school, I had become too independent. And so we split. So then when I went back in as an officer, and I got stationed, my first station was Shaw Air Force Base in South Carolina. After going to officer training school and going to the JAG school in Maxwell for 9 weeks, was kind of tech training for JAGs. Because brand new lawyers, you learn state law, you may learn some federal law, but you've got to learn the way the military law system works, and so you go to school for that. And how to deal with commanders and first sergeants and that kind of thing. And you come in in the Air Force, you come in as a first lieutenant, and then 6 months you become a captain. So when I came in, I was O2E, because my prior enlisted time counted. So I came in April as an O2E. In September, I think it was, I went over 8 years. So I got a raise for going over 8 years. Also put on captain. So I got a raise for putting on captain.
Nice.
And then right at the first of the year, I got a raise for the first of the year. So I thought, this is fabulous.
Right?
This is great, man.
Wow. I mean, you transition out of being enlisted, go to school for a couple of years,
Yep.
come back, and it's like every month you're getting a new raise is what it sounded like.
That's exactly right. It was wonderful. It was great. So stationed at Shaw Air Force Base, did basic JAG stuff. Typically, as a JAG, you're a prosecutor. In the Air Force, you're a prosecutor for about 2 years before you can move on to what you want to do next or what the Air Force needs you to do next. And I wanted to be a defense attorney, and the defense attorney at Shaw got released early, and a few months before that, the Judge Advocate General had come to our base to do an inspection, and he did an office visit with each of the captains, just to kind of talk and see how they're doing, what they want to do with their career. And he came in and said, "So I understand you want to be a defense attorney." And at this time, I had been in 8 months. And I said, "Well, sure, yes, sir, I do, but when the time is right." And the next month, I got the call that the time is right. And I'm like, okay. And so I went over to be a defense counsel. Will never forget my first client. I'm scared to death thinking, here I am representing somebody, and I think it was actually misuse, had taken dorm their dorm suites ATM card and had gone and gotten cash out of the ATM. And first conversation tried to tell me I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't do anything. However, I had a video of the camera, and there they are with their squadron ball cap on. And I'm going, you want to tell me how I'm going to explain this to a jury if we go to court? And it was just like, they did take her to court. It wasn't an Article 15 that took her to court because it was more egregious because her suite mate was TDY, was deployed. So not only taking advantage of somebody, but a deployed military member, not a good idea. So that started my defense career. Loved every minute of it. I loved being a defense attorney. You know, a lot of people will ask, how can you do that? How can you represent people that, what if you know that they're guilty? It's like, well, my job as a defense attorney is one, if it makes sure the government does their job and has to prove your guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And if they fail to do that, then you try and get an acquittal. But more oftentimes than not, is to get the most fair and appropriate sentence.
Sure.
Because you get to know the person, you get to know their family. They have their reason for whatever they did. It must be the most ridiculous reason you've ever heard of in your life, but they have a reason for what they did. And you just help them through that process, whether it's, maybe there's an acquittal, or if there's a way to get an admin discharge instead of court-martialed, then we try and go that route. Whatever I could do to help benefit my client. And a JAG works, a defense counsel doesn't work for anybody on that installation. My boss was in Washington, D.C., and so I could be independent and represent my client zealously as I was supposed to by my bar rules, and didn't have to fear any ramifications from either the wing commander or squadron commander, that kind of thing. Parents sometimes would question me about, well, you're wearing the same uniform as the prosecutor. How can I believe that you've got my son or daughter's best interests at heart? And you just have to sit them down and tell them, I don't work for anybody on this base. I don't work for the prosecutors. I know the prosecutors, but and most parents, I don't think I had too many, maybe one or two that were really concerned. And they could always hire civilian counsel if they wanted to, but most of the time I had every client came in my office. I kept those clients and did the best thing I could for them. Went from Shaw to Randolph Air Force Base, where I was a senior defense counsel, where I then helped train the new counsel on, how do you do a drug case, or how do you do a simple assault case, or I would handle more of as a senior counsel with more experience under your belt, you get more of the significant, not so fun stuff of attempted murders or child pornography or the kind of stuff that sticks with you.
Sure.
And at the time, you don't think about that it's really sticking with you. You're taking on the client, and you're responsible for that client and helping them get the best result. But then, unfortunately, you have to look at all the evidence against your client. And for example, a child porn case, there are things stuck in my head to this day that I saw 20 years ago that just, it's part of the job. That is just, and that's something that I didn't realize for a long time, that I had taken on that burden of that kind of activity, and that's just stuff, when you see some stuff, you just can never unsee, just never can do it. And so after being a senior defense counsel for a few years, I was sent to the air education and training. Went to squadron officer school back at Maxwell Air Force Base, and then went over to the JAG school to be an instructor. I'm sorry, let me back up one second. I missed one assignment. In there was at Robbins Air Force Base. I was a staff judge advocate for the wing there, and then for a couple of months, I was actually for the center, which is it's like our numbered air forces, but this was like a numbered air force on a base. It was a combined office, And so I was giving advice to a 2-star general as a major, filling the position of a colonel, essentially, for a couple of months before we had a new staff judge advocate come in to be able to give that advice. But my role was to be advising the special court-martial convening authority, who was a colonel. That's what my job was, but also a fill-in to advise the 2-star on the base on certain things that might come up to his level, on whether or not things are going to general court-martial or things like that. Also, as a staff judge advocate over an office, you're supervising a number of attorneys and a number of paralegals. And there at Robbins, there's a big civilian population, civilian employees. So we had civilian attorneys, military attorneys, and same with the paralegals, some civilian paralegals and military paralegals. So that was a huge learning experience. I had to learn to depend on my staff for environmental issues or contract issues, civil law, trust, wills, estates, and then also the criminal law aspect would be going on that I'd have to be involved with. So, and then also raising up and mentoring brand new lieutenants and captains that were coming to my office, and brand new airmen, and the junior ranks that were coming in to work with our law office superintendent, who's master sergeant or senior master sergeant. But you're still the mentor for those folks. In my criminal law background, I was trying to teach these new folks what's the best way to keep a trial notebook, or what's the best way to go in and question mom, if you're going to question mom, or if there's, somebody's going to be antagonistic on the stand. Teaching them more than what they learned at the JAG school when they went through.
Doing all that mentorship now.
Absolutely.
Right?
And so officership, how do the officers and the attorneys, how do they treat the paralegals? How can they use the paralegals to the best benefit for you and the paralegal? Because you're growing the paralegals up in the career field as well, and hoping that they can have a future in that career if they want to, even on the outside. Then, so I go to the JAG school, where I was an instructor in the Military Justice Division for 2 years, and taught all the JAG school at Maxwell is like everybody comes back to that. All the JAGs go back there at some point or another for some kind of training, so the paralegals and the attorneys. And so I'd have classes of all paralegals or classes of all brand new attorneys come in, class of 90. Brand new attorneys would be coming in and teach them all the basics over a 9 or 10 week period. Come into a senior leader JAG class where there were judges, there were staff judge advocates, colonels and above, teaching a full auditorium of those type people. So learning how to speak in front of folks, and which I didn't have much problem with that because I loved being in the courtroom, and obviously talking in front of a jury or in front of the judge, I enjoyed that. Now I will say every single time I walked in a courtroom, whether it was as a defense counsel or a prosecutor or then later as a judge, every single time I walked in the room for the very first time, my face would flush red up to about here for about a minute or so, and then it would settle down. Every single time I went into the courtroom. Because there's just that little bit of nerves, not knowing, okay, what is about to happen in this room, based on what my role is, based on who I knew the prosecutors were and who I'm up against, based on who the judges and how these judges typically rule on things, somebody that looks like a nice grandpa up there on the stand could give your client 20 years, Just, you just don't do that. And the clients see the nice, sweet person sitting up on the bench, and you're going, no, we need to go to jury with this guy or this gal, that kind of thing, making those decisions. I loved it. Absolutely loved being in the courtroom. And then I went, so after being an instructor at the JAG school, one of my friends was a judge at the time, asked me if I'd like to go on the bench, and I said absolutely.
Right.
So in 2012, I got to before I get there, I'd said all my whole career, I said I have no desire to go to D.C. I don't want to go to D.C. Don't want to be stationed up there. 19 years in service. Lynn gets orders for Andrews Air Force Base in the D.C. area. And so I said, I guess I'm taking this assignment, because if not, I get 7 days to opt out and I have to get out of the service.
Right, and then you have to retire.
Right. So I got it. Was there for 2 years at Andrews, and then I got stationed down here to Eglin in 2014, and then retired out of here in 2017. So fabulous. I wouldn't change a thing. I don't think I'd change a thing military wise. The deployments, the couple of places I got to see, the people I met. There's always some good, some not so good. Some of the mentors I had, outstanding. Some of the folks that I had to deal with, not, wondering how did you get that job? Like a first sergeant to me is supposed to be a liaison between the enlisted and the commander. And at the time I was enlisted, one of our first sergeants, not the best people person. So it's like, how can you not be a people person and be in this job?
Right.
And honestly, the reason I got out after the 7.5, almost 8 years, was because of the weight management program. I fought the weight management program my entire time being enlisted. And coming back from a deployment at the time when squadrons used to deploy together, as a whole unit would pick up and go, and then the whole unit would come back. So we'd go out with 10, 12 or more C-130s, and we'd fly out the C-130s, and we'd all come home at once. And so there'd be a big meeting of the family on the tarmac and everything. And at one time, Lee Greenwood was there for one of the welcome homes that we got. It was just, it was awesome. And there was my first sergeant waiting for me when I got off the plane to go get on the scale. And I was like this, I'm done with this. I just, I love my career. I was a staff sergeant, pinned on staff, first time testing. Gave up testing for tech sergeant, E6, just got out and said, nope, not going to do it. I'll do something else. But I had my bachelor's at that time. I had applied to officer training school while I was enlisted, and they were looking for more computer folks. And so I didn't get in on that route. But I went out, got my law degree, and just happened to make the right phone call at the right time and got back in. 4 months later, I'm back on active duty, and I just couldn't believe it happened so fast. And just was so excited to be in a courtroom within months of graduating law school, whereas for years after law school, I knew some of my buddies were still sitting in a closet writing briefs and never seeing the inside of a courtroom. And here I was in a courtroom prosecuting people representing the United States of America, or then defending people against the United States of America, who found themselves on not the best circumstances. So I loved it. Everything that I couldn't do enlisted, because I could tell you what I was doing, everything the same way every day. Every day as a JAG was different. Every single day as a JAG was different. Because I ran a tax program when I first became a JAG. And so you'd go over to the tax center, and you don't know what people's taxes are going to be like, and you supervise a few folks over there, or doing civil law, environmental law. Because I tell people that a base is like a city with it's like a city with a fence around it. And all military folks are a snapshot of the community.
Absolutely.
You come from the community, so not everybody's going to be straight upstanding citizens that come into the Air Force. There are some not so great folks that make their way past the recruiters and come in. Or something happens and they decide to take the wrong step and try this drug over this weekend, and then they get popped on a random UA or something. Good folks, but just make very bad decisions. As a JAG, I loved every minute of it. And when I got the opportunity to be a military judge, to me, doing criminal law, that was a pinnacle for me. Some people might strive to be the judge advocate general of the Air Force. That wasn't my track at all. I wanted to stay in the courtroom as long as I possibly could. And so that's kind of the stage of the military for me. What was going on behind the scenes. I got to do deployments when I was enlisted. Unfortunately, I came in the officer corps, the JAG Corps, in April of 2000, and in July of 2003, I had a shoulder surgery I had a pinched nerve in my right shoulder, and I had bone spurs under my clavicle, And so I went in and did surgery. And I woke up that day or the next day, and I had some odd tingling in my right upper thigh. And the doctors called to check on me after surgery, and I told them what was going on. I said, no worries, it's just based on the position you were on the table. Your nerve's going to be regenerating, so you'll feel that for a little bit. A couple of weeks come by, I go for my post-op appointment, told him that this is really kind of uncomfortable now. It's actually feeling like it's burning a bit from my hip down to my knee in my right leg. And they said, again, no worries, we'll start you on some medicine. And but it's just nerve regeneration. It's just going to take a little bit longer than what we would think normally. And I said, okay. They put me on gabapentin, which I've come to learn now. I really wish I'd have never been on that medication. And if I hear of anyone taking that medication, I highly recommend to them really talk to your doctor about being on that medicine, because it really can do things with your brain. It also may or may not be a weight gainer or whatever, and here I was, already fought 8 years with the weight management program. I didn't need to be in a position now to have to do that again. And so we went through phases. I got on medicine, that gabapentin, and about 4 months into this, it was getting where it was like I had a hot poker from a fire was being stuck in my leg at different times. And I would just instantly grab for my right thigh and just hold on to it squeeze as hard as I could, trying to get the pain to stop. That pain, the doctors then said, okay, something maybe not quite right here. We'll send you to a pain management doctor. So I saw a pain management doctor, and he diagnosed me with, it was paresthetic myalgia initially, which is pain in the thigh. But we then did nerve conduction studies, and we came to realize that they had severed my right femoral subcutaneous nerve in my leg during shoulder surgery. So we figured out how that happened is I was in a seated position on the table so that they could get to all different sides of my shoulder with arthroscopy. And I had a seatbelt placed across my hip. Well, where it was placed, it pinched that nerve right where it goes through the pelvic area. And during the time of surgery, if I could have woken up and told them, hey, my leg's falling asleep or something, we could have made an adjustment. But I was out for the time of surgery, and it just slowly kept pinching and pinching and pinching the nerve until it severed it, is what they really think. And what I was feeling, they were starting to attribute it to like similar to phantom limb pain.
Okay.
Because you've lost that nerve now, that nerve conduction. Your brain doesn't know what's going on. The leg's trying to tell the brain that there's pain, but there's no nerve there really to be firing off. So it was something for them to try and figure out. And so over the years, I was became a regular at pain management clinics for the entire rest of my career, cardiology clinics, because one of the medications that I went on caused me to have chest pains, significant chest pains. At one point, I was driving from Texas to New Mexico to go to Cannon Air Force Base for a court, and I had to pull over, and I felt like I had a heart attack. And when I came back to the cardiology clinic and talked to the doctor about it, he said, well, what did you do? And I said, well, I just rested on the side of the road until I could, catch my breath, and I drove on into Cannon Air Force Base. Well, did you go to the doctor there? No, it had gone away.
I was feeling fine by the time I got there.
Exactly, I was fine. Had a heart attack on the way there, maybe, They did blood work and things, and they said that they couldn't tell that there had been an event, but they then put me on an event monitor, and I was having tachycardia, very high heart rate, and then it was the chest pains were coming from that, somehow coming from that. So I was then taken off that medicine, which was amitriptyline, and they had put me on nortriptyline. It's a synthetic. It took 2 years off that medicine before the chest pain stopped. So I was dealing with nerve pain. The pain wasn't gone. So I'd been on gabapentin. I'd now been on amitriptyline and nortriptyline. So while I was at Lackland, I had a neurologist. I had a pain doctor, a cardiologist, And this is all from just a shoulder surgery. And by that time, the pain in my right thigh started to move. It started to grow down below my knee. And then I could feel it. I started to feel like I had bee stings between my toes on my right foot. So it stayed in my right leg, but it was spreading. Complex regional pain syndrome is what I was diagnosed with at the time, but it was in my lower right extremity. And then it went into both lower extremities. And my last diagnosis, when I was seeing some ketamine doctors, and I'll talk about that in a second, but I have full body CRPS type 2, which is caused by an injury. Type 1 CRPS can just happen for nobody knows why, but you can develop CRPS somewhere in your body, and it doesn't have to be from a trauma or an injury or a surgery or something, but that's type 1. So I had type 2, and with brain inflammation. So every time I get a new medical diagnosis, and this is even through today, I point back to the surgery in 2003. I was really healthy. I could run. I could, do whatever needed to do to get the job done. I could, go hours and hours and hours. I worked 18-hour days. You get into a courtroom and you don't know how long you're going to be in court for a day. Then you got to prepare motions. You've got to prepare for the next day and arguments and such. And then you're taking care of a client when you're a defense attorney. So I have all that going on. And with medicines that they were giving me, they were, you would wean on a medicine and be on it for a while. And if it didn't work, you have to wean off that medicine before they can start you on something new. I got on this medicine called trileptal, and it did wonders. It probably reduced my pain level by 75%. And I would just be in tears over that, thinking, how wonderful, finally we found this medicine. What I didn't know, I would learn about 6 years later, is that trileptal was slowly depleting my sodium. And so slowly that my body was just adjusting over time with the lower sodium. So your sodium level is supposed to be around 135 to 145. When I got stationed up in D.C., in the D.C. area, I had done some blood work, and my primary care doctor called me. I had just gotten home, and I was feeling horrible. I just crawled into bed with my uniform on, kicked my boots off, and just crawled into bed. Excuse me. Phone rang, and it was my doctor. This was at 4:30. And she said, you need to go to the hospital. You need to actually call an ambulance. And if you're not going to call one, I'll call one. And I was living by myself. And I said, okay, well, I'll take care of it. And what I did was Googled the closest hospital and drove myself to the hospital. And it was Fort Foote Hospital, which when I walked in, I learned it was a public hospital where folks go that don't have the money. A gentleman got wheeled in on a gurney with two cops on either side, and he was bleeding from what had just come from a bar fight. And this is coming through the waiting room as I'm sitting here. After apparently my doctor had told me, Lynn, you're in serious condition. You've got to, no kidding, call the ambulance. Didn't do that. Drove myself there. A doctor, they connected me ready for an IV, but then they put me into one of the ER areas, one of the bays with curtains, and there was people throwing their IVs, things at the nurses, and it was just chaos in there. And a doctor comes over to me and, you're in the Air Force? I said, yes, sir. He said, why are you here? And I said, well, because my doctor said I needed to get to the hospital as quick as possible. I Googled, this is the closest one to where I live. He said, I'm getting an ambulance to get you to Walter Reed right now. And I'm like, okay. Because my doctor had told me on the phone, you need to go to Walter Reed. And I said, ma'am, if I leave right now, if you say I'm in critical condition, I'll die before I get there. Because I lived at the bottom of the loop, and Walter Reed was up at the top of the loop, and it's 4:30 in the afternoon. Oh, you're not going to get anywhere in even 2 hours. So that's why I did what I did. But I ended up taking an ambulance ride after all. I wouldn't recommend it. Not the funnest ride ever. But as we're pulling out of the parking lot, there's moments of funny in just about everything. That when bad things are happening, there's funny things that happen too. So two African American folks picked me up in the ambulance. As we're driving by, I'm like, well, there, my truck is right there. My Ford Escape is there. I'm going to get some friends to come pick it up. And they're like, that one right there? I said, yeah. They started laughing. And I'm like, what? They said, well, it'll probably be on blocks by the time your friends come and get it. And I'm like, okay, this is good for me to hear. As I'm in an ambulance going away. Thankfully, they got my car and it was fine. But, just as things happen. So we get to Walter Reed and I go into ICU. My sodium was at 111, where it's supposed to be 135 to 145. And I've got two doctors talking over me, and they're saying, I don't know why she's not seizing. They're not talking to me.
Right.
They're talking above me. The techs are trying to find a place to stick me for IVs and stuff, and they're not finding any veins. I'm not the best vein producer for blood sticks or anything. And so, but then they continue to talk, well, we can't raise her sodium level too fast, or it'll do this to her brain. Or we can't, it can't go up too slow, or this will shut down her organs. And I'm, hey, I'm right here, right here. And so I was in ICU for a couple of days, and then I was moved to a heart ward, which there was nothing wrong with my heart. But so prior to all that happening, I started to think back, and I could see signs that something was not quite right with me and my mind and my brain, and it was the lack of sodium was causing me to, I was forgetting things. I was so sluggish. Like I said, that day I had just crawled in bed in my uniform. And if the doctor hadn't called, I don't know if I'd be here. I don't know. But so we got that under control, and they sent me to an endocrinologist at Walter Reed, and my endocrinologist and my neurologist talked to each other, and they said, well, you have to come off the trileptal. And I said,
that's the
I'm
only
not
thing
doing
that's helping you.
This is the only thing that has gotten me pain relief. And they said, well, it's killing you. And so I'm sitting in the neurologist's office. He's a major, I'm a lieutenant colonel. But I realize my place is you're the doctor, you're in charge, rank doesn't matter. Just like when you're an instructor at the JAG school.
Sure.
I could be teaching generals, but I'm in charge of the classroom. And that's the way those dynamics work. And so he said, do you want me to tell you what I'd do if I had the chance? I said, sure. I said, I'd go to your house right now and I'd find every one of those pills and I would throw them away because they are killing you. The trileptal is killing you. I leaned into him and I said, could I take half? I'm bartering with him because this medicine, the pain that I had been dealing with before I finally got on that medicine, and we're talking at that time had been about 9 years of the chronic pain, and still going through, med changes, different procedures, and physical therapies, and then doing my job every day. And a couple of those jobs are kind of stressful. Defense counsel, having clients depending on you, that's a little bit stressful sometimes. You're in court, that's a stressful environment.
Absolutely.
Being an instructor, running classes and that different kinds of stress. But I was always, as I grew up from my life, for some reason, I just overcame everything. I've been told that I was resilient more than I care to be told I was resilient. But I treated everything, and I don't know where I ever heard this saying the first time, but it sounded perfect. And so I treated everything like water off a duck's back. Ducks are out there in the rain, and it's the best time to go duck hunting and everything because the ducks are out there flying, but because the water just beads off their wings and washes off. Well, that's the way I try to teach people and mentor people is, as a defense attorney, something may not have gone great for this client today, and they've gone to jail, but you've got another client waiting for you tomorrow morning in your office. So you've got to move on. And it's always moving forward. So you just got to let it wash off. And the way I was mentoring the younger folks coming up was the same way. You can't be down on yourself. As long as you did the best job that you possibly could for your client, whether it's the United States Air Force or whether it's an individual, Airman Snuffy, you did the best job you could. You've got to move on. Just treat it like water off a duck's back. Well, when I was at the JAG school, something happened where the water wasn't rushing off the duck's back anymore. My duck was drowning. I was starting to have these mental clarity issues. I was started to develop tremors in my hands, and so when I'd get in front of a class, and if I held a piece of paper, I'd be shaking like this, so they could see the paper. I didn't want them to see me shaking because I didn't want them to think I was scared to get up there and talk to them, especially a bunch of brand new attorneys out of law school, brand new lieutenants. You know, you know it all. Right out of law
Right.
school, you know it all. And I got picked to be here, so I know everything. And it's easy to, you have to be strong willed and strong minded and everything. And yeah, you're an achiever. If you've made it through law school, you've passed your bar exam, you're now going to be a JAG in the military. But so I couldn't sit there with papers shaking, so I'd lay them down and I went to see the doctor, and I had developed tremors and vertigo right about the same time. So this is on top of what I'm already dealing with. So I got on medication for that. It's a medication called clonazepam or Klonopin. And at one time I was on 5 milligrams of Klonopin a day, which you'd think 5 milligrams, that's not much of anything, no big deal. I took 250 milligrams of this, or I was on 3,600 milligrams of gabapentin. So as medicines are different, you could take 5 milligrams and it'd be so strong versus 3,600 milligrams, not so strong. Every time a doctor would look at my records, that's the first thing they saw. Why in the world are you on 5 milligrams of clonazepam? That's horrible. And so I explained it to him. I got on it for vertigo, and it stopped something new that had started, another thing that came up medically. So the traumas that I've dealt with, mainly in the military, have been what's been considered moral injuries, because you put your life in the hands of these doctors and you come out of it not well. Whether they're the surgery that went bad, or they blame the anesthesiologist because it was his responsibility for my placement on the table and the placement of the strap on my hip. And I'm like, I don't care who's responsible, but somebody needs to help me because I can't function in this kind of pain. So also while I'm still at the JAG school, a friend of mine and I went out to dinner at a Chinese restaurant, and we had sushi, and I had sriracha sauce, the hot sauce, on top of one of my sushi rolls or something. After I ate that, the next morning I woke up and I had so many blisters inside my mouth, just from nowhere. Just I didn't know what was going on. And so I went to emergency care, the dental clinic, because it hurt so bad. And by the time I got into the dental clinic that day, it was in early afternoon, the blisters were gone. And so it wasn't just like a fever blister that pops up and you have to deal with for a couple of weeks. These blisters came up, and then they were all inside my mouth. And it felt like I had scalding water in my mouth, or that sometimes it would feel like my teeth were falling out. And turned out my dentist didn't know what in the world it was. My primary care doctor didn't know what in the world was going on. So they were taking work home on the weekends. I know they were trying their hardest to figure out what it was. And it turns out I had developed glossodynia, or burning mouth syndrome. And we think it could have been triggered by the sriracha, but I loved hot stuff. I ate jalapenos with chicken or whatever. Loved stuffed jalapenos, loved hot, spicy food. When I went to the desert, I was putting red hot on everything, which I think most folks that deployed to the desert.
Yep.
Red hot on everything. So I didn't understand that, but it may have been a contaminated, you know how they fill the bottles up in a restaurant? They cap off the ketchup or cap off the hot sauce. It may have been something contaminated, because my friend also she had some blisters and a very odd taste in her mouth for years, but nothing to the extreme that I had. And so I had tried every magic mouthwash. I had tried all kinds of different prescription stuff. I have every Biotine product I have had for years in my house, the toothpaste, the mouthwash, the sprays, and nothing would help it. And it turned out I learned that it was a stress indicator for me. The more stressed I got, the more painful my mouth got. But I was stuck with it. I didn't know how to stop it. So we're dealing with the pain that had now moved through my leg, which again, this is like, either sometimes it felt like I was being stabbed by a hot poker from my hip down to my foot, bee stings on my toes. Sometimes it felt like it was numb or felt like it was plastic. I had no feeling at all. So it would just be so strange. I was worried that if I cut myself, I wouldn't feel it, or I'd feel it extremely painfully. Went through the sodium depletion thing, ICU, emergent. I went to the emergency room a couple of times after that because once we got my sodium up, it plummeted again. This is after they'd taken me off the medicine and after me trying to stay on the medicine. Then the burning mouth syndrome started. But when I got on the medicine for vertigo, it helped the burning mouth syndrome. The clonazepam, just out of nowhere, helped the burning mouth syndrome. So that's why I stayed for years. I stayed on the 5 milligrams because it took it away. And it helped the vertigo too. So I was on that for a number of years. And then I went through, I think CRPS has really negatively affected my immune system in my body because I had a gallbladder. I'd never had a gallbladder issue, and one day I just doubled over in pain, and my gallbladder was full of the sludge and the rocks or stuff, so they had to remove my gallbladder. I joked with the surgeon at the time, okay, while you took the gallbladder out, why don't you go ahead and take the appendix out while you're in there? And he's, haha, I can't do that. Tricare doesn't want to do that, I'm like, okay. A month later, no kidding, to the day, I was in the emergency room getting my appendix taken out by the same surgeon. And I said, I told you. So I go through those. I had to have a hysterectomy at age 40 because I was just having my cycle had gone to where it was lasting 25 days out of the month.
Wow.
And we had tried other treatments that didn't work, so I had a hysterectomy. It turned out one of my ovaries was just eaten up with endometriosis. We didn't know it. So did that at 40, so menopause followed shortly thereafter. Again, that's all on top of what else is going on. And just feeling miserable. I just was feeling miserable. And I was feeling like with all that happening, and, with the paper shaking, didn't want the students to see me like that. And I have an image of me probably at one of my lowest points where I went TDY somewhere. It's after I became a judge. I went TDY somewhere, and I was in my ABUs, and I had a rolling bag that I was pulling behind me to go up to the legal office. And for the life of me, I can't remember which base it's at, but I vividly still see myself struggling to get out of the car and walk across the entryway to get into the building, where I just felt like I was doing a disservice to the uniform because I was hunched over, I was in so much pain, I was walking so slow, I just was not doing, I just felt like I was really doing a disservice to the uniform. I felt like I just looked horrible in uniform. I had a military judge before I got on the bench, asked me, when I was a defense attorney, asked me if I needed to do a court case seating at the table next to my client. He said, you don't have to get up and do your motions. You don't have to get up and talk to the jury. You can do it all from your table. And I said, sir, I can't do that. I can't do that at all. I've got to get up and represent my client, get up. But it was then I noticed that the impact the pain it was starting to have on my work. And so I started in D.C. A med board for, I'd had one med board that retained me years before, but this med board was looking like I wasn't gonna be able to stay. So it started in D.C., and for some reason I somehow, not on purpose, but slipped through the cracks, because once you're on a med board, your PCS, everything stops until the med board decides whether you're staying or you're going.
Right.
Well, I PCS to Eglin, got down here in Florida, still as a judge. Probably the last year and a half or so of my time on the bench, I was limited to doing only preliminary hearings, Article 32 hearings, which Article 32 hearings are similar to the grand jury process in the civilian sector. You put forward evidence in a hearing, and hearing officer makes a recommendation as to whether the charges should go to a court martial or not and what type of court. So I was limited to only doing those, and my travel was very limited. I had to get doctor's approval to travel, and all my medical appointments were just taking up so much time that I was having to get pulled off the schedule for court cases, and that really hurt. That hit hard.